This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
Oil prices retreated on Tuesday after rising almost 2% in the previous session as investors assessed new developments on U.S. tariffs and a higher-than-expected OPEC Plus output hike for August. Brent crude futures dipped 22 cents, or 0.3%, at $69.36 a barrel by 0630 GMT. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude fell 27 cents, or 0.4%, at $67.66 a barrel. U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday began telling trade partners, which included major suppliers South Korea and Japan as well as smaller U.S. exporters like Serbia, Thailand and Tunisia, that sharply higher U.S. tariffs will start August 1st, though he later said that deadline was not 100% firm.
The U.S. Interior Department on Monday proposed rule changes to allow energy companies to more easily combine oil and gas output from multiple leases using the same well pad, which could save the industry as much as $1.8 billion per year, it said. The proposed rule change, which would mostly affect onshore oil and gas drilling in the U.S. West, would ease limits on so-called commingling, which the department said would make operations more efficient. Current U.S. Bureau of Land Management regulations restrict commingling to leases that have identical mineral ownership, royalty rates and revenue distribution. Interior said the requirements create barriers in parts of the West where mineral ownership is complex.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
India's fuel consumption in June fell by 4.7% month-on-month to 20.31 million metric tons, oil ministry data showed on Monday. India is the world's third largest consumer and importer of oil. The data is a proxy for the country's oil demand. On a yearly basis, fuel demand in June was up 1.9% from 19.94 million tons last year, but was down 4.7% on a month-on-month basis, data on the Petroleum Planning and Analysis Cells website showed. Sales of gasoline, or petrol, fell 6.9% to 3.52 million tons in June, compared with 3.78 million tons in May, but were up 6.7% from levels seen a year ago.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday directed federal agencies to strengthen provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that repeal or modify tax credits for solar and wind energy projects. In an executive order, Trump said the renewable energy resources were unreliable, expensive, displaced more dependable energy sources, were dependent on foreign-controlled supply chains and were harmful to the natural environment and electric grid. The order directs the Treasury Department to enforce the phase-out of tax credits for wind and solar projects that were rolled back in the budget bill passed by Congress and signed into law by Trump last week. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. The global supply of heavy rare earths hinges in part on the outcome of a months-long battle between a rebel army and the Chinese-backed military junta in the hills of northern Myanmar. The Kachin Independence Army since December has been battling the junta over the town of Bamo, less than 100 kilometers, 62 miles, from the Chinese border, as part of the civil war that erupted after the military's 2021 coup. Nearly half the world's supply of heavy rare earths is extracted from mines in Kachin State, including those north of Bamo, a strategically vital garrison town. They are then shipped to China for processing into magnets that power electronic vehicles and wind turbines.
Some 32% of global semiconductor production could face climate change-related copper supply disruptions by 2035, quadrupling from today's levels, advisory firm PricewaterhouseCoopers said in a report for business leaders on Tuesday. Chile, the world's largest copper producer, already grapples with water shortages that are slowing down production. By 2035, most of the 17 countries supplying the chip industry will be at risk of drought, PwC said. The last global chip shortage, fueled by a pandemic-driven demand spike that coincided with factory shutdowns, crippled the automotive industry and halted production lines across other chip-dependent sectors.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
Indonesian palm oil exports to the United States may fall due to the 32% tariffs threatened on Indonesian goods, allowing competitors in Malaysia to gain market share, an industry official told Reuters on Tuesday. The two countries are the world's biggest palm oil producers, but Indonesia has been by far the biggest supplier to the United States, accounting for 85% of its total imports last year. But if the new tariff comes into effect, it could lead to a 15% to 20% drop in Indonesian palm oil shipments to the United States, said Hadi Sugeng, Secretary General of the Indonesia Palm Oil Association.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.